Hello, welcome. I'm Phil Hawksworth. I'm a member of the team here at Netlify, and I'm very happy to have stolen a few minutes of the day with Daniel Roe, who works on Nuxt. Daniel, welcome. How are you doing?
I am doing really well, thank you.
Okay,
And
good. There was a
lovely.
nerve-wracking pause for a second there while you thought about your your answer. But I'm so happy you could join us. Before we dive in, just for a few minutes of chat, could you let people know what you do on Nuxt? Because you work on Nuxt, but that could mean so many different things. So, what do you do?
So I'm on the core team of Nuxt. I've been there for a couple of years now, and actually at the moment I lead the core team, which is I've got to say the core team are made up of incredibly talented people, but
And they're all over the world,
yes,
right? Whereabouts are they? Are they scattered all across the globe?
we're scattered around, and the makeup of the core team has changed a little bit over the years. At the moment, we have a couple of people in France, someone in a couple of people in or around Amsterdam,
Mm-hmm.
and then we also have Australia.
Yeah,
So we're everywhere.
all over the place. Amazing. Okay, well, I know that you've been very busy as the core team, building like more and more features into Nuxt, and we're not going to have time to talk about all of them. But it would be nice just to talk about a couple of bits and pieces that are kind of interesting in Nuxt, and who knows where we'll go. But I'm very excited about the opportunity of building sites that can live in lots of different places. I care a lot about portability, both from the point of view of, well, I can make a thing and then I can put it anywhere to host it, but also, choosing between, moving between frameworks as well. That's kind of interesting. And, it's nice for everything to compete on its own merits rather than lock you in. But I know that Nuxt can support a bunch of different types of sites. And, quite near and dear to my heart are so-called static sites, pre-generated sites, the simplest possible architecture as well. So is Nuxt too powerful for that, or is it a good player for that as well? Can you generate static pre-generated sites with Nuxt? What kind of tooling do you have for that?
So yes, so Nuxt is designed to be fully static. So you can have just HTML out at one end.
Yeah.
You can even have no JavaScript if you prefer. You can just get raw HTML with no JavaScript. And then, yes, you can have JavaScript that hydrates those static pages. And then you can have something that's more hybrid, maybe some pre-generated, pre-rendered pages, and then maybe some server endpoints that you do want to be dynamic. Maybe it's an API route or two, or maybe you want some of the routes of your site to be rendered HTML on the fly, but others can be pre-rendered.
Nice.
And so it can be quite granular in terms of what you need and what matches the needs of your site.
I love that. Yeah, I love the ability to kind of gradually layer on complexity or kind of more tooling as your use case kind of calls for it. So that sounds amazing. Now I gather that there is some tooling as well to help with letting your sites find the right home. So for instance, in Netlify, we've got this concept of we've got a redirects API that can help kind of shape traffic at the kind of the edge of the network, but that requires a bit of configuration. So what can Nuxt do to kind of smooth that out and make that easier for people who are used to building in Nuxt, maybe more than they're used to building in Netlify?
Yeah, I mean, I really resonate. What you said earlier really resonates with me. The idea that that people should be able to move their sites or decide where they want to deploy them. And obviously, we're really pleased that Netlify is a zero config provider on Nuxt. People will often ask me, what's the best provider to deploy Nuxt on? And I always think that if my answer is any one provider, that I've done my job wrong, because the objective is really that people can pick the provider they want based on the value it gives them and the features it supports, rather than any limitation on the Nuxt end.
Yeah.
And one of the ways we do that is exactly what you're talking about here. So we have the concept of root rules. So you can set rules for a particular pattern of pages in your app, such as these are going to be pre-rendered, or this page is going to redirect somewhere else, or this one is just going to proxy something. And we translate that under the hood into Netlify language that produces a redirects file or produces a headers file in the correct Netlify format. And Nuxt will just detect that it's being built in a Netlify environment and automatically generate the right kind of configuration. So from a user's perspective, you don't need to know anything about Netlify internals or Netlify configuration. It's zero config. It just works. So you use the normal way that you would write and deploy a Nuxt app using root rules or however else you're building it.
Yeah.
And then Nuxt will configure Netlify for you.
Nice.
So that, because again, you want to do these things in the most efficient way.
Right.
So although obviously we could have an endpoint that performs a redirect like within a serverless function, it's much better if Netlify can do that at the edge level,
right?
Like actually within your CDN. And so that's I think it's a killer feature.
I like that very much. Yeah, that kind of sensible level of abstraction feels really nice to me. And at the risk of turning this into a call where we both kind of nod each other, and go, yeah, me too. I really like the that position of if you're asked which is the best provider and you give an immediate, abrupt kind of absolute answer, then you've done your job wrong. I just love that as an approach, and it makes me want to ask the question: is it depends an okay answer to questions? Because I've been called out on saying it depends, but where do you stand on that? It depends as an answer. Is that okay?
I mean, how can you possibly be called out for saying it depends? Like that is the always correct answer, right? But the thing that I don't want it to depend on is anything that we could make better at the framework level. And because we maintain the adapt, we do this, I've got to say, not purely on our own. Matt Kane, for example, from Netlify has been really helpful in rolling out some fixes recently and enhancements into Nuxt image. But we maintain the adapter for Netlify. We want it to work as well as it possibly can, and for it to be as good an experience for users as possible.
Nice.
So if the answer is it depends on Nuxt, then that's me doing my job wrongly. I would say.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in it depends is a fine answer as long as it then creates the question on what does it depend, so you can have a conversation and figure things out. Anyway, that's a tangent for a whole other conversation. You mentioned Nuxt image. Maybe we'll return to that in a second. But I'd also love to talk about something you mentioned a second ago as well, about the different types of rendering, the fact that you can choose different types of rendering. Can you talk a tiny bit more about that and just explain what some of those types of rendering are, and also, what does the user need to do to select between them? Does that involve a lot of effort, or how do you help them with that?
So, previously in Nuxt 2, there were different types of rendering you could pick, but they were sort of all encompassing. Mm-hmm. You picked it for your whole site. Yeah. So you might say our whole site is in SPA mode. So it's not going to be server rendered. It's all going to be done on the client side. You might say it's going to be static, which means the whole site will be pre-rendered with data maybe generated in advance. Yeah. And then that was your choice. Now we offer different kinds of rendering modes on a page level, on a root level. So you can use these root rules I was talking about to configure what kind of rendering mode you want to apply to a page or group of pages. And so, for example, if you want a page to be purely empty, with all the JavaScript doing the rendering on the client side, you would set SSR false in a root rule.
Right.
If you want a page or group of pages to be pre-rendered, so once at build time and then served statically from the CDN, you would set pre-render true. Mm-hmm. If you want a group of pages to be rendered sort of incrementally, like on demand, using something like DPR or ISR, you can set that in your root rules as ISR true or ISR 60 or 120 or however many seconds you want to elapse between revalidations.
So you can directly, just right from the same place, specify how long with the time to live for those pages when they're generated. Nice.
Exactly. And so that then, like under the hood, what we do is we turn that page, that set of pages, into a Netlify builder function, which uses Netlify's infrastructure to
Yeah.
do that revalidation for us and turn it into effectively a static page
Yeah.
until it's time to be revalidated.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's some. Obviously, the way that works, the way that rolls out across a global network of lots of edge nodes,
Yeah.
is pretty cool. But also means that it's not like it's rendered once. It might be rendered multiple times in different nodes. But it's a really, really useful feature. So I would almost treat that as a default. If you have something that needs to be server rendered, and it's not dependent on the particular user, so it's cacheable, I would almost always turn that on, because it's going to reduce your compute instantly. And it's going to make you extremely resilient. And if, for example, under the hood you're querying OpenAI or some other API,
Right.
it will save you a ton in terms of rate limits and things like that.
I love that. Yeah, it sounds like that you're making a lot of powerful things very accessible to the developer there, with quite a lot of control. So I love that. I'm a big fan of starting to use these things, like, again, incrementally, as I was saying earlier on. But the way I often build things is, I'll build it with the simplest possible tool, maybe even no framework to start with. I'm like, okay, this is all pre-generated. I need some templating, so I'll add the thing that gives me just a bit of templating, and then I'll get so far and say, oh, actually, these bits, maybe these don't need to be rendered in the build. I can render these later on, maybe just as you described, and I'll start using those with edge functions or builder functions in Netlify directly, because those primitives are there for the developer. But those primitives have also been exposed to the framework author, so that you can build those into Nuxt as well, which means that when I come along and I'm rolling something of my own, and then it gets a bit more complex and I need some of the other things as well, I can still lean on those, but do it via the Nuxt framework, so that I've got access to those, via the convenience of your framework. So yeah, I just love the way that seems to be very approachable for the developer, using the kind of mechanics that you've baked into the framework and you're using for a whole bunch of different things. It's really exciting to me. I love that.
Absolutely. I love the sort of the waterfall kind of concept there, that you sort of pick the most static, the most performant thing, and then fall down to the next level when you need to, because there's some functionality you need. So render stuff statically with no JavaScript, render stuff statically with JavaScript, render stuff sort of with revalidation, and then render on demand. Like you can basically fall down. And the idea that you can separate your site and say, like, the admin panel is going to be rendered in this way, and our API routes are going to be rendered in this way, is just really, really useful. So I mean, I deployed a site recently where the backend was effectively making requests to Google's PageSpeed Insights API, and also to their Crux API. Now, the Crux API behind the hood only is refreshed once a day. So there is 0 point in making a fresh request to that API every single time. So it's really straightforward to say, let's just cache this. So we're only going to revalidate this once a day, at most, and then we just don't have to make that external request, and run the risk of being rate limited by Google. So but yes, waterfall down, static if you can, on demand, incremental if you need to, and then only per request if you absolutely have to. And this should be as simple as possible to do that. So I think, just as you're talking about in terms of the infrastructure, because you're thinking about it, I think, in terms of Netlify primitives, I'm thinking about it in terms of Nuxt as a framework. So how do we make it possible within Nuxt to follow the same pattern of we should make available, if you're using Nuxt, all of those same kind of things. You should be able to waterfall down into from low complexity to like more complex, or low demand in terms of runtime compute to high demand, depending on what you need.
It depends. Again, there it is.
It
Depending
depends
on what you need. Okay. I could easily go down this tangent for a really long time and talk about this stuff. This is exactly what I like to natter about. However, you mentioned earlier on Nuxt image, and it just so happens that, and you also mentioned Matt Kane, who is one of my colleagues at Netlify, who does all sorts of work in this space as well. And one of the tools that Netlify, or the features that Netlify shipped recently, was our image CDN. Now, there are lots of image CDNs out there, and there are lots of ways that frameworks can leverage different image CDNs and have kind of different image handling. But I'd love to just understand a little bit about how Nuxt does that. So what's Nuxt image, and what does that give to people?
So Nuxt image is it's a Nuxt module which adds Nuxt image and Nuxt picture components, which are drop-in replacements for the native HTML image and picture elements.
Okay.
But they do quite a lot on top of that. They basically allow you to transform an image and its dimensions and maybe some transformations that you want to make up to those images into generating a source set with maybe lots of different versions of those images that support different screen sizes, to basically reduce the possible amount of image that you're downloading. So instead of downloading that 3 meg source file on a mobile phone, it actually downloads quite a smaller resized one that fits the screen. And it supports doing that for any number of different providers, I think over 20 different providers.
Wow.
And obviously those are targeted at providers from sort of entirely third-party separate providers like Cloudinary, to providers which are tied to actually your deployment infrastructure, like Netlify's CDN, to even a self-hosted one called IPX, which actually allows you to even perform these transformations in some cases at build time. So the whole raft means that people hopefully should be able to use that same Nuxt image component in a consistent way. Again, just like their deployment provider shouldn't matter for their app.
Yeah.
Equally, their image transformation provider shouldn't matter. They should be able to write the same kind of code without needing to know the ins and outs of exactly how Netlify CDN works, for example.
Nice. Yeah. I love these kind of convenience layers. I'm curious, the generation of the different assets, does that work across the different types of rendering model as well? So, for instance, do you need to be using SSR for that, or could you also use this if you're pre-generating all of the assets, or even delivering them without any JavaScript? To what extent? How low a level does it get with the support?
So pre-rendering. So we internally switched to something called a static mode if you're pre-rendering your site. And so we're able to transform those images at build time for every page which is pre-rendered. So that means that if you're pre-rendering a page and it has a selection of images on it, and they are static, so you're not going to change them at runtime based on some additional API request that you run when someone hovers a button or something,
right?
Then yes, we can generate those in advance. And so that's going to be a good first port of call for a lot of websites. But the moment you introduce anything dynamic, so you're going to be displaying these images based on like an API request that happens at runtime, or you have a really, really big website, and the time that it would take to optimize all these images at build time becomes sort of prohibitive, then actually you're going to need to turn to something that is dynamic at runtime. This is a classic it depends situation. So you can't just say like you always do it all in advance or you always do it at runtime. It really does depend on how many images you might need to optimize.
Yeah.
And so, and I mean, there might also be other reasons you opt for runtime optimization too, in terms of any number of things, including tight integration with your deployment provider, for example.
Yeah.
And so, for example, if you have a purely client-side rendering, so you're not doing any SSR, then that would be an example where pretty much we can't detect the images that are used because they're not being rendered into HTML at build time. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I think just the fact that you've got all of these different options and kind of a smoothing of the way into kind of controlling these options, I think is a model I really like very much. I'd love to spend time asking you about lots of other Nuxt things, but I feel like maybe we've taken as much time away from you and also the Nuxt community as we dare for the day. We better let you get back to it. But before we let you go, where should people go if they want to try Nuxt for the first time? How does someone get started?
So go to Nuxt.com. Hopefully you'll see a get started button and you'll be given a command, or actually you can even run it in your browser via StackBlitz. That's a good way to get going. If you've got any questions after you try that, join our Discord. It's a really good way of just firing away and finding some real people. I'm there. You can look me up at Daniel Roe. And you can find that at chat.nuxt.dev. And I think there's also a link on our website. That's a great place to go. And I'm also accessible on Twitter, or if you need to DM me or ask any questions, I'm always really happy to answer.
There's a torrent of support and question requests coming your way. Daniel, thanks so much for spending the time. It's fascinating to hear some of the details of what's going on with Nuxt. Thank you on behalf of people building websites for building some tooling and some frameworks that you can use in a variety of ways and have lots of different controls over. I'm a big fan of the framework, and thanks. So then, thanks for the time building that, and also the time today. It's good to chat.
Thank you, Phil. It's been a real pleasure. Anytime.
All right. See ya.